Welcome to my tutorial for Hudson's Adventure Island for the NES, and this took around 15 hours, 42 minutes to beat. This is one of the harder NES games that I completed on default settings. I would probably give the edge to Metal Storm on expert mode as far as NES games go that I completed. And Ninja Gaiden 3 was a little bit harder for me just because it had limited continues, but Ninja Gaiden 3 doesn't have anything in the entire game that's as hard as some of the sections in this game, so of course, if you're unable to get past those difficult sections in this game, then you can't complete the game. So it is kind of a brick wall that you do have to overcome to beat the game. So, when considering difficulty, that is something to take into account. Though it can be hard to give exact ratings. But, Ninja Gaiden 3 took a little bit over 16 hours for me to beat. This took close to 16 hours. So time-wise, it was similar, but very different kinds of games. This game has unlimited continues. If you get the Hudson Bee in the first stage, which I'm going to show here, it's at the very end of this first stage. So very different kind of games. When you take into account having to replay the entire game over and over again, that counts into the completion time as well. So it's a different comparison when you're dealing with unlimited continues. The fact that this game almost took as long as Ninja Gaiden 3 did, and it has infinite continues, speaks to the difficulty of some of those stages. Now the game can be pretty challenging, even on the previous stages before 7-4, but the game really doesn't show its teeth until you get to 7-4. World 7-4 is where things really start to pick up, and there's a huge difficulty spike at that point, and that's probably what puts off a lot of players. That's probably why the game has such a reputation for being one of the hardest NES games. Now I have heard a few people say that they think it's harder than Battletoads. I definitely don't agree with that. But I will say that it has, a few sections that can rival probably any single section in an NES game as far as some of the sections. So, it is something that has to be learned for sure. Without save state practice to really isolate and learn the sections, it's going to be a hell of a time trying to get past some of those sections. So already we're going to see, if you noticed at the end of stage 1-1, I got an egg right before the goal. Make sure you get that. If you don't get that, reset the game, because unless you're trying to do a 1cc run, no continues used, you need to get that egg. And then whenever you lose all your lives and go out to the title screen, you hold down a direction on the controller. I always hold down left on the D-pad and press start, and that will allow you to continue. I'm not sure what direction it has to be. I think there's a few, you can use a few directions and it'll work, but I always just did left. And that worked for me. But if you get these fairies and these eggs, you're going to get invincibility for a temporary amount of time. It doesn't last very long, but it's enough to get past some sections. Each stage is broken up into 4 checkpoints. You'll see them indicated by the signs 1, 2, 3, and 4 in each stage. And, if you die around the vicinity of one of those signs, you get the checkpoint. You don't even need to make it all the way to the sign most times, but if the sign is on screen visibly and you die, usually you'll get to start at that checkpoint. So the game is at least forgiving in that regard. But you do get those 4 checkpoints, but of course if you run out of all your lives, then you will go out to the title screen, where that's where you'll use the continue code. Now the continue code is legit because it's in the manual. The game manual actually tells you how to get that Hudson Bee. So, while it does almost seem like a cheat, it's actually in the manual. So I would say it's legit to use the continue code. Or continue feature is more what it is. Now, the skateboard is something you don't want to get too often unless you're a speedrunner. It's okay in the earlier stages, because the earlier stages really aren't too challenging by 8-bit platformer standards for games of this time. You know what I mean? It doesn't get crazy until later. It can definitely be challenging, especially for those who are inexperienced. The game can be very hard early on, so it is going to depend on your level of experience with platformers. But in the case of me, I've gone through a shit ton of these kind of games, so I didn't really have trouble until I got to 7-4, and then that took me about 2 hours to beat 7-4, and then I think 8-1 took me about an hour and a half. And then 8-2 was the hardest stage for me. That's an ocean stage with a really crazy swordfish jump. That took me 3 hours to beat that stage. And then there was 8-3 with a really tricky bat jump. And 8-3 8-3 took me about 2.5 hours, so 8-3 was actually the second hardest stage for me. And then 8-4 was the final stage. That took me only 42 minutes. I was surprised how easily that went down. That was the easiest of the hardest stages for me to complete, but that's going to vary depending on the player. But I'll go over all those details maybe a little bit more as we get to those stages. I took notes of the completion times of those stages just to try to rank them in order of difficulty for me anyway. Of course, it's going to vary for the player, but most would agree that those 4 stages are probably the hardest in the game, or at least 3 of them are, because the game has a very strange design decision later on where the developers of the game decided to stop giving you weapons for some reason, which is really odd. It doesn't really make a hell of a lot of sense because it's kind of random. You know, it's seemingly random when they do that. It's not like it's a consistent thing. It's like sometimes you get a weapon, but then they stop giving you them again on the harder stages. So it just feels like sloppy design. It pretty much forces you to do pacifist runs, which is, no weapons on some of the stages. You're seeing a little bit of that now, but I think this stage probably does give you a weapon at some point. You see there's a weapon right here, but you're not going to get weapons in the harder stages later on. They're not going to give you any weapons. There's going to be a few times where they do that, and the stages are going to be very, very difficult, very dense, and some of the jump timing is completely illogical. It's really bizarre. So yeah, Andreas M is a viewer of my channel that I've actually been having some detailed exchanges with about through email about the difficulty, like the hardest NES games and things. It's an interesting topic that I've always been interested in when it comes to not so much the most difficult NES games, but just the most difficult games in general, because I play games of all time periods and consoles and all that shit. But we were having some detailed discussions, and he's also completed Battletoads. I never have. I could never sit down with the game. I just didn't like it. But he's beaten Battletoads and he's beaten this game, and he also agrees that Battletoads is a much harder game. But this game does get rated as one of the hardest NES games by some Mystic, a speedrunner, recently put this at the top of his list of hardest NES games. Though I think that was based on a limited amount of NES games that he played for some kind of challenge or something like that, but he put it above Battletoads, which I definitely wouldn't. But I mean, for me, this game, the reason that this game is hard for me was because it has a few, like I said, it has about 3 or 4 stages that are really hard, and that's what makes the game hard. But aside from that, it wasn't too bad for me. I mean, I did spend some time on some of the stages. I'm sure I spent more than 30 minutes on some of the stages, but that's really not that big of a deal for an old game like this. So it wasn't really until later where the game really shows its teeth. But Andreas M kind of got me to get back into this game because it was a game on my fucking to kill list. It was a game I wanted to beat for years because I owned it when I was young, but I just never sat down and worked on it seriously again. So with all the discussion we were having about the difficulty and shit like that, it got me interested to actually beat those stages for myself and beat the game so that I could compare it better and say, what I really think of the difficulty of the game. It's about what I estimated, from videos and shit like that. I kind of estimated that the stages would take me from between 1 and 3 hours, which was about right. Or maybe 1 to 4 hours, but none of them took me 4 hours. The longest one was 3 hours, so I had a general idea of what to expect. Plus, my good friend also beat this game years ago, and we discussed it a lot. And he showed me videos of some of the really bizarre jumps that he had to do to beat the game and shit like that. So we talked about it a lot, but I didn't really dig into it myself again until very recently. So whenever you have platforms that endlessly scroll like that, you can just keep jumping up. You don't have to go flying off the end like that. But you can already see they're doing some tricky shit here with the swordfish that kind of pop up as you're trying to jump to the next platform. As a general rule, the thing I noticed with the swordfish, at least in the hardest stage, was that the swordfish only seem to appear when you're on the upper platforms. That's when they seem to come at you. I don't know if that's a theme throughout the whole game, though. I'm going to have to look at that and see what happens with the game, but I do remember that being a thing on Stage 8, too. So if you're having trouble predicting when the swordfish are going to appear, they usually appear when you're on the upper platform, not the one that's lower. Just something I noticed. But, I mean, that might be a specific pattern just for that stage. I'll have to watch this playthrough. See, I didn't pay a hell of a lot of attention to the rest of the game, aside from, I beat it, but I didn't get stuck for very long. And I didn't rewatch the footage until now. And this is my first time rewatching the entire playthrough as I'm doing the commentary. So, a lot of this stuff is going to be coming back to me as I see it. There wasn't anything super notable, honestly, until 7.4. I mean, in reality, I could just do a tutorial for 7.4 and the rest of the game from that point, and that would be a good enough tutorial because, there's not a hell of a lot to know. I mean, you just have to do well and learn the enemy movements and things like that as you normally would in these kind of games. I mean, one good thing about this game, it's not really a strength of the game, but it's good for the player, is that enemies have consistent behaviors and patterns for the most part. The thing the game does, it places them in more precarious ways as you get farther. It puts them in more troll type of positions and shit to try to fuck you over. That's basically the game's, that's the trick that the game has up its sleeve. It tries to throw shit at you in a weird arrangement. So as you get farther, they switch up the arrangements and try to put shit in your way, pretty much. That's like the main gameplay theme. And actually, I did complete a review of this game that's going up in a few days. It'll be up on Monday, so I go into more detail there. But to summarize, I don't think this is a great game or even really a good game. I think it's an okay game. I don't think it's bad. I like it. But so what I did in editing is, you see that game over that appeared there, and then it kind of reset my lives. That's how I edited it. Now, most of the time, when you see a new stage, like this is a new stage, each stage has each world has 4 stages. So 6, say I'm on world 6, it would have 4 stages, 6-1, 6-2, 6-3, 6-4. Now, the 4th stage always has the boss, which the boss is identical. It's always the same boss, but it has a different head, and it takes more hits the farther you get into the game. They take more hits to kill. But the pattern is identical for each one. So, you will see that. But, basically, I forgot what I was going to say. It probably wasn't too fucking important, but, so this game, like I said, you're not gonna see anything too insane until you get deeper into the game. But it was cool to go back to this game and, actually beat it. It was one of those games that I always wanted to complete from my old fucking library. It was definitely one I wanted to beat. But, these games kind of just sit in your fucking mind for a while until you actually decide to sit down and deal with the bullshit. You don't beat them. So, for these more frustrating games, I definitely have to be in a certain mood to want to deal with the shit. You know what I mean? But yeah, the enemies always behave in the same way. It's just going to be the arrangements that are going to throw you off. That's the way the game is designed. They put there's only really a few enemy types and a few obstacles, but they're going to be arranged in really, nefarious ways to try to fuck you over. Really, sometimes cheap. 2 big issues the game does have that makes it even harder is, of course, it's one-hit deaths. But unless you get the skateboard, you can take an extra hit, but the skateboard is not advised most of the time, especially later in the game, because it's hard to control. And, you can brake by holding back, but it makes it a lot harder to control. But yeah, so the game, overall, it's pretty much like the arrangements are just constantly being switched up, but the enemies always behave the same. So, you are getting a taste for how the enemies are going to behave. It's just that they're going to do some really bizarre shit with the positionings and timings later on in the game. So that's what you're going to have to watch out for. But now those brown frogs, whenever you see a brown frog, you can run directly at it, and it will jump over you. You don't have to try to jump over them. So that's how the brown frog behaves. Whenever you see a flower, if you run past it a little bit, a fox is going to run up behind you anytime you see a flower. So that's another thing to keep in mind with how the foxes behave. The green frog doesn't move. It just stays there. It will not move or do anything. And so for the green frog, if you hit it with your hammer once, it turns into a brown frog. And, of course, you know how brown frogs behave. They jump at you when you run at them. So But normally when you see a green frog, it's better just to hit it with 2 hammers or 2 fireballs and just kill it. The fireball is a stronger version of your hammer. You get it from certain eggs. There's a lot of hidden eggs in this game that you get from jumping around the environment, but the fireball can break rocks and boulders. So it has an extra use to where it helps make the environment a lot easier when there's a lot of rocks and shit to dodge. So it is good to get the fireball and keep it if you can. But most of the time I was not able to do that for, multiple stages or anything. So I had this tutorial is going to show me beating the hardest stages without any starting weapons. That's what makes this video useful. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to explain in great detail every little thing I did because there's just too much going on. I don't even know how to slow videos down or anything. My editing skill is not at that point yet. But I'm just going to kind of give some general tips of how I approach those stages. Try to break down what I can. But yeah, you will see, this is another boss. It's exactly the same as every boss. Just takes more hits at this point. But most of the time when you see a stage transition, you're going to see that I edited in a fresh start with a fresh start of lives, and no weapon, no starting weapon. Because most of the time, I didn't beat multiple stages in a row most of the time. So, unless it was very early game. But most of the time, I'm starting from a fresh set of lives again. So you see the game over, and then you see loaded state. When you see that, that means that's a reset right there. So that lets you know. And I also edited in. I left the game overs in. I tried to leave those in the show, but I may have missed a few in editing. But for the most part, you can assume that when I'm starting a new stage, I'm probably having to do it on a fresh set of the 3 lives that they give you. So that's most of the time what's going on. So yeah, I think that covers quite a bit. Now some of these platforms are weird. You have to go right to the edge of this platform to trigger the platform to move. It's bizarre. You would think just by jumping on the platform it would be enough, but you got to go right to the edge to trigger that platform to move, and then you can jump across. It's not straightforward. A lot of things in this game do get a little strange. And another thing with positioning is there's going to be times when you want to go to the edge of certain platforms to lure out a swordfish or to lure out the bats to make it easier to get across. So that's going to, I'm going to try to explain that when it's something that needs to be done. But I'm not going to catch every little thing that I do, so that's why I'm going to say, 2 things with this game is if you're having trouble, analyze the way I'm moving through because there's a reason for it most likely. The positioning is very important and the timing. And also just use save states on an emulator and just keep practicing specific sections until you get them down. And then you can put it together and beat the stage. That's what I did to beat this game. I even had save and load state functions mapped on the foot pedals so that I could do it real quick without having to take my hands off the controller, which, is always useful because it doesn't interrupt the flow of the game. So that's been a useful little change that I made more recently. So for these, the timing is tight. You got to run and get on these platforms and try to get across, and it can be kind of tricky. You may want to practice that to get the timing right with with save and load state. Just practice sections like that if you're having trouble. There is a part like that in 8.3 that's extremely difficult because it has bats that you have to deal with, and one of them is very odd timing, very hard to deal with. It seems very intentional, but you're probably not gonna see me fail on some of these parts, but I would try to point them out. Some of them I did die on my successful runs. This is basically showing my successful sets of lives. This playthrough. So if I went out to the title screen, I don't show those deaths, but if I died a few times in a stage but still beat it, then you're going to see that. So that's why there's deaths still shown. Because you see, I died here, but I got a checkpoint. So now, of course, sometimes I'm going to die probably before I get to one of the checkpoints, but as long as it was within that set of successful lives where I beat the stage, then I leave all that in. Now, something important about these snakes that's not clear is that the snakes only fire if you shoot most of the time. So if you don't fire your axes out, then the snakes won't fire at you, it seems. So it is something to keep in mind. I think that's how the snakes behave anyway. It seemed to be the case that a lot of times they won't shoot at you unless you shoot at them. That one, for whatever reason, wasn't firing, but now this one is. But it seems like if you don't fire your axes out, they won't even shoot. So you're probably better off just trying to jump over all of them instead of firing at them. But if you decide to shoot at them, then you may have to dodge some projectiles. There's going to be times when you don't want to shoot at them at all because it's just like there's too much bullshit going on in the area. And the last thing you want to deal with is projectiles. So, you have to... it's kind of determined on the area. But see how those snakes aren't firing at me? I think it's because I'm not shooting my axes out. I was just jumping over them. So these are all the little enemy behaviors and things that you want to take into account when you're putting everything together. But those are just going to be the basics. You're going to have to do some really difficult shit later on. But as you can see, there's really not that many different enemy types. So the octopuses just, they just keep jumping up and down continuously. They're a pain in the ass, especially later on. Snails, obviously, they just move at a super slow speed. I mean, there's not much to some of these enemies. It's just the combination when they start packing in a shitload of them, in a small area. It becomes very hard. But nothing crazy, yet in this game. Again, when you see that flower, a fox is going to come up, so just be aware. I believe it's the same distance every time. Like, if you move a certain distance from a flower, I believe it always triggers the fox in the same distance. So, of course, this is one of those games that, you can really learn positioning and tricks like that. Another thing that I haven't mentioned yet is you do have a life bar, but it's not really a life bar. It's like a really short timer. And the way you keep that timer from counting down, it's those bars right above my head. The way you keep that from counting down is you got to try to keep collecting fruit to keep it up. And if you don't collect enough fruit, obviously then the timer will run out and you'll die. So that's another way you can die, and that is a pain in the ass on some stages. So keep that in mind. But aside from that, you die in one hit. So sometimes for these swordfish, a good trick for some of them is when you land on a platform, is just jump straight up immediately and you'll kind of clip through them. You don't always have to do that, but you'll see a lot of times the swordfish dodging is very close. You see how his tail was clipping right through me. That's just kind of how it is. You get used to doing that, and it works, but you'll get used to what you can get away with as far as, your hitbox and shit on your character. The swordfish do have some leniency. It seems like the back end of their tail won't really damage you. So, it's not the whole swordfish that can hit you. It doesn't seem. So now, of course, whenever you get to a stage like this, especially later in the game, it is better if you can just keep your weapons from the previous stage, but I usually never did. But if you do keep a weapon, these spiders are really fucking easy because you can just run through and just kill everything with hammers. It makes it way easier. But most of the time I don't. But, luckily they do give you weapons in these earlier final stages, like these final world stages. They will give you hammers and shit. But you'll see later that there's not going to be any weapons in some of the stages. But like I said, it's really only 4 stages. There's 4 really, really hard stages. And that's pretty much it. I don't think that's enough to elevate the game to one of the hardest NES games or anything like that. But there's some very hard parts. So now, I believe I have no weapon at this point, so you're seeing a little bit of simple pacifist playing with no weapon. My friend posted up his runs a long time ago with this game, many years ago, and one person commented that he was doing a pacifist run as if that was the intention. But really, that's just what the game makes you do. If you lose your weapon, you don't have a choice. So it's definitely not done to look flashy or anything like that. That's like the main thing that makes the game so difficult is that they start taking your weapon away. So you're going to see that some of these earlier stages you're going to see that I'm not playing nearly as clean as I do later on, and that's just because I only do what I was forced to do. You know what I mean? Like The stages that I had to play for multiple hours, obviously I learned them and I was able to play pretty well. But the stages that didn't take me that long to beat, they can be kind of sloppy where I barely beat them. And that was good enough because I was just trying to beat the game. So that's all this is. Now you see if there's 2 flowers that you pass, then you're going to have 2 foxes. So it's like sometimes, you'll have multiple flowers, so that means that you're going to have multiple foxes running up on you. And the distance is always the same as far as I can tell, so you'll get used to when they're going to appear. You can either shoot behind you to be careful and try to hit them. They take 2 hits with an axe. Maybe 1 with a fireball, I'm not sure. But you can shoot behind you, or you can just... I usually just jump them. Now, if you don't shoot here with all these snakes, it's easier just to jump over the snakes, because if you shoot at them, they're going to shoot at you, so just be aware. So another exact same boss fight, but just takes more hits. And somehow early on in the game, I was actually fucking these fights up, because I think I would get twitchy. Kind of, just get kind of fucking twitchy on the bosses. But I was more consistent later on. I got a little bit better with dealing with them. The main thing is, they are very easy, but the control is so slippery that you really can't just play it aggressively like you might normally play in a game like this, because that extra slippery of the aspect of the controls. It's easy to slip into the boss. So you just got to kind of stay patient and stay in that middle range and just, only fire a few hammers at a time. Don't get greedy. Each time he throws a fireball, jump up and just fire a few hammers and then wait for him to throw another fireball and then jump up again. Don't try to get 2 jumps in. You can be really aggressive, but it's a lot easier to die, so just play it safe. Especially on some of the harder stages, you don't want to risk it by trying to be aggressive on the boss. Just be patient with it. It really is like a very easy boss fight. It's just, it's easy to fuck it up if you're in the moment. So with the birds, a lot of times if there's one bird, you can let it pass over you if you get in the right position, which is what I did there. Now there's going to be times when there's a whole flock of them, and sometimes you can do the same kind of thing with the positioning. Other times you might want to kill them, if you have a hammer available. Now, of course, luckily this stage is still giving us weapons at this point in the game, so there's not going to be anything crazy until they start stripping out the weapons. Now, stage 8-3 does give you weapons, and it's still one of the hardest stages because it has that ridiculous one single fucking jump in the entire stage. That jump is so hard, it's the hardest part of the game, that it makes that level one of the hardest in the game. Though I did have more trouble with the ocean stage, which had a swordfish jump. The swordfish jump wasn't quite as hard as the jump in 8-3 with the bats, but it was like the stage as a whole was much more dense, much more difficult. So the combination of having like a much harder stage is what made that one overall take me longer. So sometimes I like to put 3 or 4 rocks in your way, which can be irritating. It's more annoying when there's 4 of them because you can't jump across all of them. So you got to go carefully in between them. And that can be a pain in the ass later on. What sucks about getting stuck in between the rocks is that usually you'll get bounced from rock to rock and it strips your health really, really fast. So it's irritating. I guess that's the only time when you really take damage in this game, is if you bounce off of the rocks. That's about the only way you can take damage and not get killed in one hit, aside from having a skateboard, obviously. But I mean, just as your regular form. So later on these stages, there will be a very hard version of this stage, I believe 8-1, where it took me about an hour and a half, and that was quite hard. But, a lot of players don't regard that as one of the harder stages, but for me, it gave me some trouble. But it wasn't nearly as hard as the other ones that I mentioned. But this is a much easier version of what we'll deal with later on 8-1. The stages still aren't getting crazy as of yet. Though I will say, if you're having trouble with some of these earlier stages, be prepared for a huge increase in challenge once you get to 7-4. At that point, it pretty much doesn't let up much. It's pretty much from 7-4 until 8-4, you're going to have very hard stages. So it's that last chunk of the game that will probably prevent most players from completing the game. I think that's what most people have a problem with when they stop playing the game. It's kind of like a brick wall type of thing. Of course, they put that fire right on the ledge that makes it kind of annoying. You got to do like a, you got to jump on the edge and then jump around it. You might be able to get a running jump and go over it, but some of the positionings can get very irritating, especially later on. You'll see exactly what I mean later on, and if you play it, of course, then you'll understand. It's hard to represent that in a video, but I did post a lot of failed attempts and practice sessions and shit like that to show how long it took for me to get some of these crazy jumps and shit. Like I said, there's really only 2 really fucked up jumps in the game that are very difficult to time. But, there's stages that are still very hard, even though they may not have those jumps. Because you get no weapon, so that just makes things way harder. So, of course, with the ice stages, you have control in this game that feels like you're on ice 24/7. It always feels like you're playing with ice. But then on the ice levels, it gets even more slippery somehow. So, you do have to adapt for that control. You got to get used to that. And the ice levels can be kind of challenging at times. They're not easy. But, they're not the hardest stages in the game. As far as the icicles go, you can get just a little bit before them to make them fall. You can do that for all of them. Remember, all enemies and obstacles behave the same. The behavior is consistent in this game. So once you learn how to deal with one, you know how to deal with all of them. It's just you're going to have to deal with them in a different configuration. Now, I got lucky there. You can break the icicles with your axe. I broke it right before it hit me in the head, but that's not something I would try to do intentionally. But yeah, they always behave the same. So you can break the icicles with your axe or fireball if you want. But a lot of times you can't hit them because they're up too high. So a lot of times the best thing to do, if you want to play it safe, is just get close to where they're going to fall, to lure them to fall down, and then just move back. And if you do that, you can make them hit the ground, and then that clears them out so you can move ahead. So this is a little tricky with all these skulls here just because of the slippery, the slippery control plus the extra fucking slippery control of the ice. That's what makes these stages a little tricky. There's some tight jumps. If you have axes, you can try to kill some of the spiders too. There's a few ways that you can approach some of these sections. You don't have to do them the same way. But whatever path you find in practice when you're using save states to practice, which is what I recommend doing, is the path you should stick to. You really shouldn't try to improvise. You should try to stick as much to as you can to whatever you practiced. Because when you start experimenting with different shit in the middle of a stage, it's easy to fuck up. I mean, you can get away with it a little bit on some of the easier stages, but when you get farther into the later stages, you really want to have it down. I mean, sometimes I would get a little lucky, but it wouldn't be enough to beat the stages. And for the final stage, there's going to be a specific way to go about that as well, which I'm going to really be detailing what I'm doing in the later stages. Because see, I don't even remember these stages. These stages were so fucking basic. I mean, they're not like easy, but relatively, I was kind of blazing through a lot of the game at a pretty decent clip until I got to 7-4, for the most part. So these stages aren't even in my memory. I don't really even remember what the fuck was on these stages. I mean, it's always the same shit, but I don't remember anything that stood out. So I'm not really going to have any memory of what I was dealing with until I get to 7-4. That's where my fucking brain will kick in, and then I'll be like, yeah, I had to do all this shit. And I'll remember a lot of that, because I rehearsed those a lot. I had to fucking redo those again and again for... some of those took a few hours. And I'll go into how long each one took when we get up to that stage. I'll go down the list again and rank them in difficulty order and all that shit. So nothing too stand out here. I mean, they do get kind of gradually harder. I mean, the difficulty is done pretty well early on in the game. For most of the game, there's a nice gradual little difficulty increase. It's pretty well balanced as far as a gradual difficulty increase. I think it's pretty well done, but it all goes out the window on 7-4, where there's just a huge increase from the rest of the game. And they start doing kind of cheap bullshit, like not giving you weapons anymore, which is not really a normal design decision for most games. But yeah, same boss fight again. Always remember that if you want to do a high jump, you got to hold the run button, and if you want to do a little hop, you don't hold the run button and just jump normally. So when you're fighting the boss, you want to be holding the run button, but you don't actually want to be, you don't want to be moving left to right very much. You want to minimize that and kind of stay in that middle range. But you want to hold the run button so that you can do the high jump, because that's the only way to reach him with your projectiles and hit his head. But yeah, this is starting to get pretty far. We're almost halfway through the game at this point, but it doesn't mean a hell of a lot. You're not really halfway through the game because from a time perspective, you're not really too far in this game at all as far as the amount of time it's going to probably take to beat those hard stages. So you're going to be most likely investing a lot more time. You could easily have another 10 or more hours of actual failing the levels before you actually beat the game. So you can use the skateboard as you see, but the skateboard is always going to be a little bit of risk. I like using it sometimes, but not... I'm decent with it, but I don't really like using it when it comes to those later stages. I purposely avoid it on those stages. Because, see, it does shit like that. You can brake, but you can't completely stop. So when you get to a platform like that, you can't, if you were just walking on foot, you could stay on the platform and get up to the top. But with the skateboard, it makes that a lot harder to do. So, it's one of those things that you may or may not want to get. But again, these stages are not going to be anything too challenging as of yet, compared to what's coming up later. So, you can fuck around a little bit on these stages as long as you beat them. The goal really in this game is just to beat each stage, whatever it takes. So now we're about halfway through the game. As far as the stages are concerned anyway, but things are definitely starting to get more challenging by this point. As you can see, it is starting to get more aggressive. But it's really nothing compared to what's coming up later. So because I tried to break that egg by throwing out some hammers, you see it activated the fucking snake. That basically, aggravates them. So, like I said, you got to be really careful around those fucking snakes. Don't disturb the fucking snakes, God forbid. Really gotta watch yourself, man, around those fucking snakes. But yeah, whenever the brown frogs just run under them, they will jump over you if you just run at them at full speed. The fucking pigs, there's nothing to them aside from the fact that you do sometimes have to jump in between them, which is a little tricky if you don't have a weapon. Now this is a little bit of a dangerous arrangement with the snail, because you do want to kill the snail. And then, of course, when you fire at the snail, it's going to piss off the snake and it's going to shoot at you. Now, I'm pretty sure the amount of projectiles that the snakes shoot at you is related to how many times you fire your axe. So, if you fire your axe 3 times around a snake, it's probably going to shoot 3 fireballs at you. I think that's how it works. That was my understanding of how they behave when I beat the game. So, I could be wrong about that, but it does seem to be what they were doing. You'll notice that the birds, they have a consistent behavior, as well as, they just fly like, in a wavy pattern. But it just depends where their starting point is on the screen, But they're not going to swoop down and try to go out of their way to attack you, but they're usually in your fucking way. Same with the bats. I think the bats kind of fly straight and then they swoop down a little bit. I think they always do the same movement, but it's just, they're going to be placed in such a way that it's going to be a pain in your ass, Though I don't know, sometimes with the bats it seems like they behave a little bit differently. Like some of them seem to swoop down lower, but I don't know. I haven't really analyzed that. I just, when it comes to bats, I'm just dealing with them as I see them. I haven't thought about them too much. But some of the other behaviors are pretty easy to predict, like I said. But it's just going to be when you have them in awkward positions, that's what's going to make the game hard. The enemies themselves are all very easy. The obstacles are very easy by themselves, But it's just when everything is combined, the game becomes kind of a freak show at points. These springs will just fling you around. Now, there are bonus stages and shit that I didn't bother to mention because I didn't really get them. The only thing I'll probably mention is a few false enemies that are not really enemies. You can bump into them and you'll get a pot. The only reason that's useful to know is because you don't have to worry about avoiding the enemy. You can just let them hit into you if you want. That's all I did with that information. Like I said, I wasn't looking for bonus stages, but if you do activate the hidden bonus stages, I guess you might be able to skip a little bit of a section or something like that, it seems. So if you're interested in that, maybe check a video that shows like a full completion of the stages and see about how to get it. Because, I never really did that. I don't know if I did any bonus stages in this whole run. I was just going for beating the game as usual. I actually found that an old 30-year-old 6-button Sega Genesis pad, old Sega Genesis pad I had from fucking 30 years ago was the best controller to use for this game for whatever reason. I started fucking around with a bunch of controllers. I figured out in RetroArch how to set it to 16 maximum users, which means I can have like 16 controllers hooked up. So I just started fucking swapping between them. Before that, I could only have one controller hooked up at a time. It was a big pain in the fucking ass. I mean, I would experiment with some of my modded joysticks and other controllers, but I didn't experiment as much as I would have liked to, because I do like playing around with different controllers for different games. Sometimes you find the right controller for the right game. It's a weird fucking thing. But the 6-button Genesis controller, it worked fucking awesome for this game. And there was another, my other modded joystick. I have a Youre 3 that I modded joystick with some Famitsu buttons that are a little bit harder to hit. They're not super sensitive buttons. And that worked great for the game as well, for whatever reason. So I was, near the end, I was starting to use those controllers, and they both worked great. But I settled on the 6-button, 30-year-old fucking Genesis pad. Worked great. I'm always surprised that those old fucking controllers still work after 30 years, but it still feels like a new fucking controller, which is crazy how well made that shit was. So we are starting to get farther into the game. But we're not fucking there yet, as far as why I really made this video was to really break down stages 7-4 and beyond. But we'll get to that soon. But without a doubt, the game has already been challenging for a little while now. I mean, no doubt. I'm not trying to say that it's a fucking easy game until you get to 7-4. It's just compared to what we're going to be dealing with a little bit later. So for these frogs, you could do that, but all you really need to do is jump over them and just keep running, as you see me doing. And you see, the frog only goes so far. They don't follow you for the whole game or anything. They only follow you for a little while. So once you know where the frog is going to stop, you'll be able to do it every time, no problem. So I didn't really know that at the time, that I could just, whenever I see a frog facing the wrong way, I could just jump over it and just haul ass. And that's what I recommend doing whenever you see that little thing going on most of the time. Unless there's other shit in your way that prevents you from doing that, but a lot of times that does work. There's not too many scenarios where the frog is facing the wrong way in the game, but it does come up a few times. Keep in mind that as long as you're constantly running, it doesn't matter if you jump, you're still moving at the same speed. Jumping doesn't slow you down and it doesn't speed you up. So if you're running at full speed and you start jumping while running, you're not going to lose any speed, you're not going to gain any speed. So you don't have to worry about, when you're running, running away from the frog facing the wrong way, you don't have to worry about it catching up to you because you're jumping or anything. You're not going to lose any speed by jumping. So you can jump over whatever you need to. Again, same exact fucking boss. It just takes more hits. So here we have a pretty wide jump that we have to make to get across, but that's kind of becoming a common thing. So you're going to have to make that right at the edge. And now we see things are starting to get more challenging. Like this water stage is not fucking around. This is pretty hard. At least it looks pretty hard. I don't remember struggling too much with these stages, but it's still not easy. So you're starting to have to time things, but just imagine this, but packed with a lot more shit. Like tons of fucking swordfish and other bullshit, and then you'll get an idea of what 8-2 is going to be like. And then add to that, there's a really ridiculous fucking swordfish timing on one of the jumps that's just fucking insane. Even in practice, I couldn't do it consistently. That's how hard it was. With save state practice, practicing the same jump again, reloading with foot pedals, using foot pedals to reload again and again and again for fucking long periods of time. And I was unable to do it consistently, but I got a general feel for it. And that's what I'm going to be telling you later in the game, that some of those parts I did by feel, not so much by the visual. I mean, that's part of it. You know, like I said, I've mentioned this before, but with these kind of games where there's crazy timings and jumps and shit like that, I make visual markers. And the way I do that is, you know, like for example, with the spider jumps that are coming later, the way I do it is when the spider reaches a certain point on screen, that's my cue to jump. Because I'm taking into account that by the time my jump launches, the spider is going to have moved a bit, right? So you make these mental markers. That's what I did for Gym Power for Super Nintendo, which is one of the hardest games in this style that I completed. Super tedious fucking memorization game. And I have a tutorial for on the channel for that as well. But for that one, it was the same kind of shit, though more extreme with the positionings. And, you know, although this has a few parts that rival any section in Gym Power as far as the difficulty of those two sections. But Gym Power, of course, is a consistently difficult game, very hard game. So, you know, it's much harder than this overall. But this does have two parts that are harder than any single section in Gym Power. So it doesn't fuck around. And, you know, really it's about making mental markers, which I'm probably going to get into a little bit later when I have to do that more. But even with those mental little markers I made about positioning, when to jump, this and that, you know, you perform it like a machine after a while. You just have it registered. You know, it's burned into your muscle memory from practicing it so much. And it doesn't become, like, frustrating or intense, really. It becomes more of just a kind of almost like a casual thing because you just do it so much. So that's what you're trying to do. You want to burn these things in your brain. It's intense at first and frustrating. But remember that if you just plug in the time, you'll get there with the muscle memory. And so you don't have to get overly stressed and pissed off about it. And I mean, I still got pissed off at the game, but if you're making save and load states and practicing again and again, just be confident that your practice will take you to the end result, and don't get too fucking stressed out about the current situation, you know, because it will improve. Just got to keep practicing. But you're going to have to figure out those weird timings and have to understand them. So, but you don't have to have it mastered to beat the game. Like I said, I didn't master those jumps at all. I would die probably more than 75% of the time that I got to those jumps. Maybe the swordfish jump I could do, maybe I could get it 50% of the time, but I'm not even sure if I could. But I didn't have any of those jumps down, either one of those two jumps down consistently, but the bat jump and the swordfish jump. So, but it was good enough, you know what I mean? Because when I got there, you know, that was my chance to try to break through. So eventually I would get it on an actual run. So, you know, those are the kind of things to keep in mind. I guess it's almost more of this video is almost more of a how to approach things, you know, mentally, practice-wise, and, you know, not to expect instant results. I guess that's what could be gained from this. But hopefully I can give a few positioning hints and things like that. I'll try to do it the best that I can with a game that's constantly moving. It is hard because by the time I explain something, the part is gone, you know. I tried to do that with Gunsmoke, which was the most insane old game that I ever completed. And, you know, I kind of failed at trying to keep up with the action on screen when trying to explain some of the really, really fucking dense parts near the end of the game, like the final boss checkpoint. I just could not keep up with that, with all the things that I wanted to explain. And it came out really fucking messy. But, you know, that's just, I don't, like right now I don't have the ability to slow down footage in editing or anything like that because I don't know how to do that. So I am like limited to like very basic editing skills at this moment. And I kind of like to show the full playthrough uninterrupted when I put commentary over it, but you know, again, that's probably just a little fucking issue that I have. But I kind of like just having like the full game running. I don't really like interrupting the action, but I mean, you know, I could maybe do something in the future with that. So these stages can be tough. You can see this is actually one of the pretty hard stages, not one of the brutal ones. But this is where it gets hard with all these position of rocks and everything. And one of the best things you can do is keep your weapons, especially if you can get fireballs. I think you can get fireballs in this stage. And really, it's better if you can keep them. You know, if you can keep the fireball. This stage looks very similar to 8-1, which gave me a lot of trouble, but I guess it's probably a little bit different. But for a moment, I thought I was looking at 8-1, but I don't think we're that far yet. Let's see where we're at. I wasn't looking at the numbers, but I don't think we're that far yet. Okay, yeah, 6-3. So I guess it's not the really hard one, but still kind of hard. But you'll see a harder version of that on 8-1, I believe, if I remember right. I'm pretty sure I remember those stages, man, because those fucking stages after 7-4, it's kind of hard to forget which ones they were because I played them a lot. So some of these jumps are getting tricky with these multiple spiders going up and down and things. This is preparing you a little bit for what you're going to experience on 7-4 and beyond. 7-4 and 8-4 are going to have these really hard spider jumps. So this is giving you a little bit of a taste of what to expect, but you're not really going to get the full experience until you get to those stages. Though I will say this, after beating 7-4, 8-4 was pretty easy for me, only taking me about 42 minutes, which is relatively easy for this game, the later stages in this game. So I think if you learn 7-4, I don't think 8-4 is going to be a big deal for you. I thought 7-4 was harder, but maybe because I was still learning how to get better at spider jumps and shit at that point. So maybe all the skills I learned in 7-4 carried over to 8-4, I think, you know. But for me, 7-4 was the hardest stage because of when I had to do it. I had to do it earlier, obviously, than 8-4. So 7-4 was the harder one for me. But I guess by the time I got to 8-4, maybe I was better prepared, and it wasn't really that bad for me at all. So for these, it's kind of just particular positioning. I think you can jump over both of those spiders if you want, but I didn't know that at this point. I wasn't really experienced with the spider jumping by this point in the game. You'll see me do a little bit more advanced stuff a little later, having a little bit more knowledge of how to deal with that. I never like when there's 4 rocks in a row like that. You can try to bounce off like that, but a lot of times you'll get bounced in between them and killed. The best way to do those 4 rocks, for me, a careful way, is to jump between each one. So if you want to play it careful, try jumping between each one. It's a little bit of a precise, tricky jump to do, but you're going to get used to doing precise jumps like that at some point because of what the game is going to expect, especially later on. So you might as well get used to doing those little tight little jumps between the rocks. So we're getting pretty far now. We're only a few stages away from the first extreme stage. So we're getting there. We have another ice stage here. Now a lot of this is designed so that you can kind of keep running and killing shit while the icicles fall. So take advantage of that little rhythm if you can and keep moving. Often the game is designed like a speedrun game where it's kind of designed to keep moving, even though it is hard to find those. It's hard to find those patterns a lot of times. A lot of times you feel like you need to stop. But if you really want to, you can play this game really fucking aggressively. I just did it a little bit because that's kind of my nature. I'm an aggressive player, but I mean, even on the later stages, I slowed down at points because there was just some crazy shit, and I kind of had to collect my mind or just get it right, But on the later stages, I kind of had it down to where I could move pretty fast, mostly. Whenever it comes to the spider jumps, I take my time a little bit on the harder jumps. But there is one part on 7-4 where you got to do it all very fast or you'll run out of time. So that's one thing that makes the stage, harder. So here you get an eggplant. If you can avoid getting it, don't get it, obviously. Because what the eggplant does, I'm going to explain to you now how the eggplant works. Actually, I forgot to explain that. Maybe I'll explain it later again. But the way the eggplant works is when you get that eggplant, it's an item you never want to get, but sometimes it's placed in a way where you can't avoid it as far as I know. So when you do get the eggplant, it's going to keep draining your health at the top at a very fast rate until it goes away. Now, the way the eggplant works is my good friend who beat this game explained it to me. The way it works is the eggplant leaves when your health gets down to a certain point. So it might be when your health gets down to something like 3 pieces of health or something, it's very low. When it gets down to that exact point, the eggplant will always leave. So it's not a timer-based thing. It's based on your health. So the reason this is important is because if you keep collecting fruit while you have the eggplant, you're going to be maintaining your health. So the eggplant is going to continue to persist because the eggplant is based on your health meter, not some kind of temporary timer. So, there are times when you're going to want to not get the fruit and just wait for the eggplant to leave and then get the fruit, especially with milk. The milk restores pretty much all your health if you find it. It's usually in an egg. So if you do have the eggplant and there's a milk, the best thing you can do is just wait for the eggplant to leave and then collect the milk. Because then you'll get full health and the eggplant will be gone. Now, if you collect the milk while the eggplant is on you, you're just going to be extending the eggplant's timer pretty much. Because like I said, it's based on your health meter. So, that's a very important thing to know with the eggplant, and I think that helped me later on. I didn't know that at all until my friend explained it. So I figured it was like, I figured the eggplant was similar to the fairy. The fairy, it shows up for a fixed amount of time. It's the same amount of time each time. And you get your invincibility for a fixed amount of time and then it leaves. But that's not how the eggplant works. It seems to be like that, but it's not. It's based on your health meter. So once your little health meter gets down to maybe 3, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 2, I don't know. But it's when it gets down in that lower range, it's always going to leave at the same amount of health. So if you're curious exactly how it works, then just get an eggplant and test it yourself. But you don't need to be exact. Just want to wait for it to leave if there's a big health item like milk. With the fruit, fruit doesn't give you back very much health usually. So with that, you may be able to still collect that and be all right. But you got to kind of just consider that depending on what situation you're in, where your timer is at and what's going on. It's just one of those little pieces of information that you're going to want to utilize. It's good to know. It'll help you, make a decision on what to do with it when you have that bullshit going on. So soon we are going to get to, I think we're probably pretty close to 7-4 now. Again, nothing extreme yet compared to what we've been dealing with. And compared to where the game is headed. Obviously don't do that, but it's so easy to fuck up in this game because of the slippery controls. It's, once you launch, it's kind of hard to fix your launch. So it's very easy to fuck up. Someone breaking into a fucking car outside, nothing to be concerned about. But yeah, for some reason I keep fucking up this jump. I think this is a little tricky. I think what you have to do on this jump is run and then jump while you're running to get the height. I think that's where I was fucking up, which I'll show in a minute. You gotta make sure you hold down run the whole time, I think, if I remember right. So you're running. Now, see, I'm going to run and jump immediately. No, actually, no, I'm sorry. It's when the platforms are close together. If you notice, there's 2 platforms there on that vertical part. There's 2 platforms, then there's a big-ass gap. And then there's 2 platforms again. So you got to wait for the gap part to go away, and then when the 2 platforms are close together, you can just jump straight up. But I think you still have to hold down the run button to get that height. Yeah, I know you do, because you do a little short bitch-ass jump if you don't hold down the run button. So, yeah, so you will have to do it that way. You got to wait for those platforms to be close together. That's why I kept fucking that part up. It's very specific. It's not clear what you have to do there. That's why I kept fucking dying there. But now I remember after watching it. So you can jump over the snakes and all the rocks, and obviously it's better not to fire on the snakes if you can avoid it, because then they go fucking nuts. The more hammers that you throw out or fireballs, the more they're going to throw shit at you. So I try not to, unless I know I can easily kill a snake, like if there's one snake and some other enemies or something. But whenever I can, you see, I try to jump over those fucking snakes. And if you do really tight jumps, like, if you time your jumps just right, you can get the distance and clear shit. Sometimes you got to jump right where your fucking stomach is touching the enemy, basically, to get over some of the shit. So some of them are very tight. But a lot of times I would rather do a really tight jump like that than have to fight all the shit. So that first frog is tough because the rock's in your way. Now you might be able to run and just take the hit from the rock and go past that brown frog if you want. Because I have done that in similar situations. And I am going to do that a little later. But I didn't know about that little trick at this point, so I wasn't utilizing that. But it is a way that I found to deal with frogs that are right against a rock A lot of times you can hit into the rock and run forward and get past the first frog. But I'm thinking it would probably work on that frog that's right behind that rock. But I did not test it in this area, but I have done it in similar arrangements, so I think it would work. Nothing too hard here, just be aware of the birds, obviously. See, that frog, I think you could probably run into the rock and take the hit and just keep going, but you'd have to try. Now, that's a hard part. I remember that's a little tricky because I had to jump between the bats. I don't know if there's a way to lure those two bats that come as a pair. I don't know if there's a way to lure them out and then kind of move forward. I remember when I was playing that part, I had to get them to come to me, but I had to do a little jump where I jumped in between the two bats, as you saw me do. And it's not the easiest jump to do. So now here we are at 7-4. This is the first extreme stage, and this one took me a little bit over 2 hours to beat. So this was one of the hardest stages in the game for me, out of the 4 hard stages. So here you can wait for those crows to leave by just standing in a certain area. You don't even have to jump them. Now, as soon as you get past this frog, just keep moving. Get the milk here. A fox is coming, so just jump straight up. Of course, just jump over this whole mess of shit here with the spider. It's nothing hard yet. Now run past these guys. Jump over the green frog at the end. Spring over all this shit. Very easy so far. So the main roadblock is coming up in a minute. It's going to be one of these spider jumps. So jump over that one. Do a short hop for this one, which means don't hold run. Jump over that one when it's going in the bottom position. Now you got to go between these at the end. That's the hardest jump. Those two spiders at the end of that series of spider jumps is the hardest one. For that, the trick is, of course, make a save state for that jump and practice the shit out of it. That's my first piece of advice, which is the best advice I can give. But aside from that, now for this part, you got to move very slow and lure out the fox and the pigs and just take it slow so you can jump everything. Rewatch that. You'll see that I moved very slow, inching the screen so that the pigs would come out and the fox would come out, and I had enough time to jump everything. It's very tight timing. But for the spider jump, you got to wait until for that last spider jump, you got to wait until the I believe it's the top spider is coming down to kind of like the middle range and then going back up again before you make your jump. I don't even remember the exact timing on it, so it's hard for me to advise. But what I'm going to say is you got to figure out where to jump and where to time it, and you got to make a mental note of it, and you got to try to be consistent with that. And the best way to do that is to make a save state on that part and just practice the shit out of it and find the timing, make a mental marker of when you have to plan your jump. Remember that, you want to mark it in your mind, taking into account that the spider's going to move by the time your jump launches. So you got to kind of get it. You have to align that perfectly to get that jump. So you're going to have to make a really good mental marker. And I don't remember exactly what the mark that I used in my head was for that part. So it is hard to give exact advice. Now, this is another stage that took me about an hour and a half, or an hour and 20 minutes. And, it's definitely, I guess it's not one of the hardest ones, but it's one of the harder stages. Now, my trick for this one was to beat the stage without dying. That was the easiest way for me to do it. So I get the fireballs. You see where I got the fireballs? They're always located there. So you can get the axe and you can get the fireballs. So this stage is not going to strip you from weapons or anything. You do have weapons as long as you don't fuck up. So keep the fireballs and just kill everything as you're moving forward. But you want to do it pretty quick because you have a pretty strict timer here. So you want to get it down to where you can move at a good clip. You don't have to haul ass, but you want to keep moving. And keep the fireballs, as I said, because, after you clear out this row here, there's going to be... Just jump on these edges, and you can avoid all the frogs. But yeah, now run and keep mashing your fireballs to get through all these guys. So now I believe there's a milk here. So kill these things, and just keep running through here. And coming up is going to be some hard... This is where it gets hard. There's a bunch of skulls that you have to deal with. So, try to clear that one out from a distance and jump forward. And try to clear out the skulls that you can. But you're going to have to kind of plan your jump so that shit's not in your way. And you want to use the fireballs to clear out what you can. Now just keep moving. Kill the bats. That's an eggplant. Try to avoid that. You don't want to get that. It makes it a lot harder. I think I barely beat the stage because I got that eggplant. So don't get that. But I think they do give me a milk actually here, so that might have saved my ass on this part. Yeah, you get a milk right here. So, kill the skull. But see, because I got the milk, look what happened. The eggplant didn't leave. And now I got another eggplant. That one is hard to avoid, but I think you can avoid it. But if you do get the eggplants, you see you got to move very fast and kill everything very fast. And that's just a hard stage. You see, I was down to the last fragment of health. And then if I would have died there, I would have been on the last checkpoint, but with no weapons, which makes it harder. So, it's better to beat that stage without dying and keep your fireballs. Now, this was the hardest stage in the game for me. This is 8-2, and this shit is extremely difficult. You really got to get your timings and jumps down, and you see how tricky it is. And that's going to just be a lot of practice. Very hard to explain the exact things to do here, but you got to know when to move and where to position yourself. It's very specific. You can go under the octopuses a lot of times, but you got to deal with the swordfishes. Now, the swordfishes appear on every upper platform for the most part, not the lower ones. So that's how you know they're coming. Now, you're going to have to be ready. There's going to be a part coming up. It's going to be one of the hardest jumps in the game coming up on this section. And I cannot freeze the game or anything, so unless I died there, you're probably not going to notice it. But there's going to be a swordfish coming up where you're going to have to jump perfectly off the edge of the platform. And it's super specific. It's so hard for me to explain. It's this part. See that? You got to do that exact. You got to jump off that exact edge of the platform that I jumped off of and then keep running. And then when the swordfish clears you, then you jump. But it's so fucking hard to explain. I mean, luckily I didn't die on it, but that doesn't help for the tutorial. So you're just going to have to practice the shit out of that part again and again. And if you want to see me practicing it, check out my failed attempts. But now for this fourth checkpoint, for the third checkpoint you have invincibility. It's very easy. For the fourth checkpoint here, you just want to keep moving and jumping. You can do it pretty fast. You'll see me do it again from a naked start here with no axes. Here you'll see it. What I do here is this fourth checkpoint is I keep running and jumping. And I just react as I'm moving. I find that the easiest way to deal with all that. Jump straight up for the swordfish. Immediately jump straight up when your feet touch the platform. Again, that part you don't have to jump straight up. Now this part's tough. For this part, you want to jump down when the pink octopus is at the peak of its jump. You want to jump down so that your feet hit the platform while the octopus is descending back down. Very hard to explain. Now for those birds, you want to get up on these vertical platforms and just hang out on them. That will let you dodge the birds. Now for the final jumps for this stage, you want to hang out on that platform. It kind of floats in the air and it won't fall down. You can hang out and plan your final jump to exit the stage. So use that to just sit there for a little while and plan your jump. You think that you have to jump on that platform and rush, but if you notice, the last platform hovers in place. But yeah, that stage took 3 hours. So it's very, very hard. Now we have another brutal stage, but the stage here is actually easy. Relatively easy. It's going to be the one jump in this stage that's brutal. It's the hardest section, the hardest single section of the game, and I'm not going to be able to demonstrate or explain it very well here at all. So I'm just gonna kind of gloss over it and try to explain what I did. But you need to do save state practice to get the positioning right, and it took me a while to even beat it with save state practice. Even longer than the swordfish jump took me. It was one of those things that seemed like, how the fuck do you even time this? It didn't make any sense. Just like the swordfish jump, but worse. So, I'm going to try to explain it best I can. It's not here yet, but you'll see it. This part is pretty easy. Just go on the platforms, go to the edge of the platforms, and lure the bats. And kill them with your axes. For the most part, you can do that on most of these bats here, so it's pretty easy. If you play it carefully, don't try to speedrun this part. Lure out the bats. This one will fly over your head, so no big deal. Kill that one. That one comes out immediately when you jump on the platform, so I think you have to kill that one at the last second. This one will go over your head. Now, as far as timing the platforms, you want to jump toward the platform as the platform's coming back toward you. That'll give you your best chance of landing on those 4 platforms. So here I like to play it safe because the jump is coming up. So just jump the boulders and then jump the flame. You can jump the flame and the boulder at the same time if you want to speed run it. But no point. So jump over this fire. Now here's the hardest jump on the 7th platform is where it is. So, jump at the edges of these platforms, like 3/4 on the platform is when you do your jumps. And you got to have your axes coming out so that they hit the bats as you're moving. And the 7th platform is where it gets insane. That's all I can really say about that. So let's try it again. You see, I didn't even fuck up on the hardest part there, I don't think. But let's try it again. So about 3/4 through the platform is when you jump. You got to have your axes kind of coming out ahead of time. See how I did that? It's that last bat right before the flame. It's brutally difficult, and it looks easy there, but you got to have your axe kind of like going along the bottom of the platform as you're almost like your body is chasing the axe. It's almost like your body is connected to the axe as you make that jump. And it's really hard to set up like that. Now keep in mind that fire, if you notice that fire that's before the goal, that's a fake fire. So don't worry about trying to jump over it. It looks like it's positioned in an area that'll fuck you up, but it's not. It won't hurt you. It'll just bounce you. Just make sure you're not bouncing back to the left side and into the pit. That's about it with that. But yeah, tons of practice on that part is all I can say. Just keep practicing different timings until you get it right. There's really, I don't even know how to break something like that down aside from saying that. Now this is the final stage of the game, and this took me 42 minutes, and this is actually can be very hard. My friend said this was one of the hardest stages for him, but for me it was one of the easiest of the hard stages. So now this is where it gets hard. So the first 2 jumps weren't a problem for me, the first 2 spider jumps, but it's that last one. So I'll try to explain it best I can. So you're going to have to get the eggplant here, unfortunately. Make a short jump for that, jump over that. Now this is the hard jump. See, I died here. This one is really hard. For this last spider jump, you have to wait for the spider to kind of be at the peak of its movement where it's coming back down, and then you want to jump over it. Now you can jump in between the spiders as well, but I don't recommend that. I found it easier to jump over them like that. But you got to plan it. You got to plan that jump timing so well. You got to have a really good mental marker, and for me, it wasn't consistent. I didn't get good enough at that to do that every time, as you saw. It's a very hard jump. That's the hardest part of the stage. Aside from that, the hard thing is that the eggplant will make it so that you don't have much time to deal with all that shit. But did you see what I did after I made that hard spider jump? I waited for the eggplant to run out, and then I collected the milk. Make sure you do that. If you just collect the milk, the eggplant is going to be stuck on you for the rest of the stage. So that will pretty much make it impossible to finish this part. So don't do that. Now this part is always hard because, with these 4 rocks, you've seen this configuration before, but if you're not careful, it will drain all your health. So it's better to jump in between each one and play it safe. And don't fire, obviously, because of the snake. Just jump over the snake. There's a brown frog that I just jump off the... When the ground is starting to slope downward is when I make my jump to get over the brown frog. But I didn't really have enough time to explain all that. The boss fight is the same as it's always been. It just takes more hits, so nothing to explain here. But yeah, that one spider jump is really hard, and it's like there is an egg that you're going to see that I skipped in the beginning of this stage. Skip that egg, because if you get the milk there, you're just going to get a ring later on, and you're not going to be able to get your health back from the eggplant. So there's an egg. You're going to see me run past an egg in the beginning of this stage. There's a reason I don't get that egg, so don't get it. Now, if you do get it, it's not a big deal, because as long as you die on that checkpoint that I died on, with all the difficult spider jumps, as long as you die on that checkpoint, you can do it from a fresh life anyway. So it's not going to be a huge deal if you get that egg on accident, but it will probably prevent you from beating the stage in a single life, since you will probably die. But like I said, after you make that difficult jump, activate that hidden egg with the milk in it, but just wait for the eggplant to leave when you're at low health, and then just collect the milk. Now, it's a very tight timing, because the eggplant, it's hard to even get the milk in time before the eggplant leaves. You have to do all those spider jumps pretty fast because of that fucking eggplant, so that makes it especially difficult. You really have to have your timing down to where you can execute those jumps pretty quickly. But yeah, that's pretty much it as far as beating the game. Hopefully that helped. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.